This is an interview with Representative Monty Fritts. It is specifically related to Second Amendment issues for the state of Tennessee. I have not prompted any questions or answered with Representative Fritts whatsoever. Is that a correct statement?
That is correct.
And so, what we're going to do is we're going to run through 13 questions that will be the same for every candidate who chooses to do this interview. And so, with no further ado, we're going to get started.
13 questions with my approach. That's 3 hour interview.
Yeah, I'm going to try to keep you from running on. So,
All
we'll
right.
see.
All
All
right.
right. Number one, what changes to Tennessee's gun laws will you commit to if you're Tennessee's next governor?
Let's get to full constitutional carry. Let's get rid of the stupid intent to go armed and the carry in parks. Let's decriminalize campus carry. Let's impact the gun-free zones that the state government has set up in buildings and all by removing those postings. I think I can do that by executive order on those postings. Let's not enforce those laws that are unconstitutional. The 1989 law that was placed in by the Democrats prohibiting long gun, shotgun, if you're within arm's reach, your ammo and you're not going to range, et cetera, et cetera. Those are foolish things. Let's make all those changes. House Bill 2514 did most of those this year, Richard. There's probably a couple things I missed in that big, what I would have called an omnibus bill of constitutional carry in Tennessee. I think we need to deal with ammo. I think there's still some wrong statements in Tennessee code on ammunition that we need to correct. I think, and people are going to ask me why I would push for those things. First, I think that a well-armed public is a safer public. I think that we've been a detriment to the safety and security of places like Memphis and Davidson County and even Kingston and Knoxville and places in this end of the state because we have established a bias against our creator endowed rights, and that keep and bear arms, while it was put in place for predatory politicians, it is a great deterrent for predatory criminals.
Number two, what existing laws, regulations, or executive orders do you believe currently violate either the Tennessee Constitution or the Second Amendment relative to the rights of an individual to keep, bear, and wear arms?
So many of the things I just mentioned, our young Americans for Liberty have been a really powerful advocate over the past year, year and a half, to try to bring about campus carry. Whether it's your 250-pound grandson who's going to play football for Cumberland University or whatever, or your 92-pound granddaughter who just wants to become a nuclear engineer, to deny them their creator endowed right to keep and bear arms when they go on the campus is an abhorrent thought to me, and it is to the YL. The postings that we have allowed, House Bill 2514 that I mentioned earlier, even dealt with campuses, not just college campus, but K through 12 campus. Those of us who have, gone the extra mile, if you will, above and beyond what is really constitutionally required, and we've been fingerprinted and gotten the permit, shouldn't we be able to not be criminal if we carry across an established boundary line at one of our schools? Isn't there a way that we can do that to make our schools safer? I think so. I think that, certainly the whole intent to go armed and the appeal that General Scarametti and Governor Lee pursued after the Hughes v. Lee lawsuit victory in court is indicative to me of an environment in Nashville that is predatory when it comes to many of our rights, especially the Second Amendment rights. I'm reminded of a story in First Kings chapter 21. First Kings chapter 21, and it's where King Ahab goes to a guy named Naboth and says he wants to buy his vineyard from him. And Naboth refuses. So in that story, just to be quick, the wicked King Ahab of the northern tribes, he goes off and gets into a state of depression, and his wicked wife, Jezebel, who had brought foreign gods into God's people, which is a whole other thing to discuss. But anyway, she had introduced all the foreign gods. She wrote letters and basically had Naboth killed just to take the property from from his ownership. And Naboth has a great statement in there. I'll paraphrase. And he said, "The Lord forbid me to give up the inheritance of my fathers." While he was talking about real estate, the inheritance of our fathers in Tennessee, and of the Father, the one, the true God, is a right to keep and bear arms. That's what I think. And I think that when state government gets into trying to strip those rights away from us, those people are behaving either like Ahab or Jezebel, and it's time for that to stop in Tennessee.
Number 3, given the authority to make law is constitutionally vested in the legislature, what powers of the office of governor would you exercise to remove statutory or regulatory restrictions in Tennessee on the Second Amendment rights protected by the constitutions?
So I think first and foremost, back to my answer on the first question, if I am hired to be the governor of the state of Tennessee, we're not going to enforce unconstitutional law. I think I have an oath, a fidelity to oath requirement to not enforce unconstitutional law. And I think that's going to be tremendously important. I think an executive order can remove some of those silly postings where we establish all of the government office buildings in Nashville as gun-free zones. I'd much rather have a sign on them that says that we have enabled the employees with marksmanship training. Enter at your own beware if you're coming in this building to do something wrong. And I say that with a smile on my face, just because we need to add a little levity in this situation. But we have become a generation of scaredy cats, Richard, and we should not behave that way. God did not give us a spirit of timidity, but rather one of boldness. One of the first executive orders you'll see from me are standing order. I'll probably term it a standing order because it'll only apply to state employees. Stop lobbying for and against legislation that comes through the General Assembly. We're not going to have legislative liaisons that sit and argue either for, well, it should always be arguing for your rights, but arguing for specific piece of legislation or arguing against your rights. And you and I both know that happens in Nashville today. We're going to stop that in its tracks early on because it's unconstitutional. Governor doesn't have that authority. Governor has the authority to look at that bill once the General Assembly passes it to his desk. He's got 10 days signed into law or veto it or let it lay, not counting Sundays, and go into law without his signature. And the governor does have the constitutional right to make suggestions from time to time. We're definitely going to do that. But we're not going to author any more administrative bills that we send over and hand to some new or been there too long legislator and say, here, carry this just the way we've written it. That's not the way this is supposed to go. I think that's part of my big complaint with part of the Hughes v. Lee appeal, Richard, is I heard from my colleagues things like, we need to appeal this so the court can tell us how to write the law. That is so foolish. And I heard that from otherwise good men that have just been blinded by the deception and that spirit of Jezebel in Nashville, Tennessee. And I know that sounds a little hyperbolic, but I do think that applies today. And I think that we have had people that have attempted to assume authorities that neither God nor Constitution has given them, and it's time to rein those things in. Ending the appeal is important to me because we're spending tax dollars. So one of the first meetings after inauguration is with the Attorney General to end this appeal because we're using state resources to work against the rights of the Tennesseans. And to me, that's objectionable.
That's going to cut one of the questions down to just a few seconds, so we'll go on from there. Do you support the decision of Governor Bill Lee and Attorney General's committee to appeal the ruling in Hughes v. Lee? And on that topic, if you are governor, what will you do if that case is still pending?
I absolutely do not support that. We sent a letter and got several other, I think I got 11 other signatures. We sent it in. Please advise the governor not to appeal this. It's working against the rights of the people. As governor, again, as I just said, one of my first discussions with the Attorney General is let's stop this. We're spending Tennessee tax dollars to work against the rights of Tennesseans. And that's the most objectionable use of tax dollars. While there are many objectionable uses, that is the most objectionable use.
Number 5, how do you define which arms, as the term is used in the Constitution, are protected by the Second Amendment or the Tennessee Constitution? And which type of weapons, including categories of firearms, do you believe should be prohibited to individual ownership?
And none is my basic answer on that. I think that when our founders wrote those words, they intended in the Second Amendment that you mentioned, they intended the public to be armed just as the military of that day would have been. And I think that has not changed today. That is, just because we have different technologies, it does not interfere with or change the meaning that the founders put in place. I think the same thing with Article 1, Section 26. I would like to see us get that constitutional amendment through to get that second part of that sentence taken out, as we've tried a couple times. Shall not be infringed is really clear. The Second Amendment is of the most, to the U.S. Constitution, is of the most bluntly stated, right? Little room for discretion amongst common sense people. And we've allowed that to be stepped on and walked on. We've allowed National Firearms Act to be 90 years plus now, I guess, in place, restricting barrel lengths, and you have to get a Mother May I permission and carry a piece of paper with you to have a suppressor, and all these foolish things. Federal law, but we really need to be pushing back on that. It's been greatly disappointing to me to see congressmen and senators, especially the ones that are running for governor, sit timidly and allow that NFA to remain in the one big beautiful bill without any objection that I saw. It's time that we have a governor that will stand up and lead the voice for the nation. That should start in Tennessee. That voice of keep your hands off my rights ought to be birthed and raised and made healthy in the state of Tennessee. And we've not had that recently. I intend to bring that to that office.
In line with that, do you believe that an individual has the constitutionally protected right to own and bear arms that are carried by the modern individual soldier?
Absolutely, yes, I do. As a matter of fact, this past year, I think West Virginia started something that made a lot of sense to me. They found a loophole in this ridiculous NFA, and the state of West Virginia was moving, someone there was moving to leverage that loophole so that the state would actually sell fully automatic firearms and move us back to a point when you could purchase those. I'm fully in support of that. I don't have any desire to have fully automatic firearms myself because ammo is still more expensive than I would like it to be. And there is always that range day temptation, I guess, to expend a lot of rounds very quickly. But our founders intended that because that Second Amendment and our Article 1, Section 26 is the check on overreach of the government.
Number 7, are there any weapons that an individual soldier today might be issued that you believe that individual citizens should not be allowed to own?
Well, I think we're issuing drones today, and I'm not a big fan of us issuing drones on domestic soil. So I probably, weaponized drones is something I'm not in favor of the military having. So I don't necessarily want my neighbor to have a little electric flying machine with something mounted on it. But outside that and the humor in that, again, I'm an absolutist when it comes to that Second Amendment. Shall not be infringed is crystal clear to me.
Number 8, current TN law requires several gun-free zones that are subject to criminal enforcement, including any privately owned property that the owner-manager decides to post. What gun-free zones do you believe are allowable under the shall not be infringed mandate of the Second Amendment?
I think that's very few, if any, to be honest with you. I know that some have ruled the courtrooms, and I understand the common sense of not allowing a person who is accused to maybe go armed into a courtroom, but we've allowed that to go into the courthouses to the point now that our wives, our grandmothers, our daughters, our sons, they must secure a firearm in a car to go buy their tags in many cases. And so I think that's great overreach. I want to see that changed. I want to see the campus carry I mentioned early on our college campuses. I want to see that decriminalized. While I want to respect the rights of the private property owner, would it not be sufficient to just say, this is my place? I would appreciate it if you would not carry a firearm in my business, and then not criminalize that for the person who's either practicing open carry or with a concealed carry permit. Uh, that can be a conversation rather than something that makes me a criminal just because I walked past an itty bitty posting on a window. Again, I think the people that authored that have revealed their anti gun bias, Richard. Oftentimes, I've seen in my 4 years in the legislature, we'll take on some cause and we will pass some law because something bad has happened. Some evil person has done something wrong, and we'll target the firearm. And we won't target all deadly weapons. Butcher knives on ball fields or ball bats in butcher shops or bakeries are just as much a deadly weapon as a Glock or a SIG or a Smith or whatever. Unfortunately, that bias, you see it in these weak males in politics, that they're scared to death of the firearm, or they're bought and paid for by the lobbies that work against our firearms rights, our creator endowed firearms rights. And we need to change that culture in Tennessee. I intend to do that.
Number 9, currently, the governor alone has decided that the state capital is a gun-free zone. What will you do if elected governor with respect to whether citizens can carry on publicly owned or managed properties?
Yeah, we'll repair that. It goes back to answer on one of your first questions, and it includes the state capitol. I think the folks over at Cordell Hull manage that much better than the folks in the state capitol do, right? Because you can actually carry in the Cordell Hull building. And to not be able to do that in the capitol is like the ultimate insult, I think. We're certainly well staffed with troopers and security there. And to say to that person who's traveling from West Tennessee or East Tennessee hours, and they want to come tour the Capitol, that they've got to leave their firearm in their hotel room and walk without it, or to leave it secured in their car, is an unreasonable request. It is not asking too much to just be respectful, keep your firearm in your holster, and I intend to remove those signs.
Number 10, currently, Attorney General's committee is fighting to retain 2 gun control laws that have been declared unconstitutional by a 3-judge trial court. Do you believe that Tennessee law should be changed to establish a publicly elected official whose job focuses on identifying and removing potentially unconstitutional laws or regulations in Tennessee, including if bringing civil actions against the state to protect and restore constitutionally protected rights?
Absolutely. I actually think that's the constitutional responsibility of every judge, every legislator, and the executive to do that. And it's unfortunate we even have to have that conversation. But yes, I do think we do. We've allowed ourselves to, now we're paying people within the state to work against our rights. That's crazy. If Article 1, Section 1 of the Tennessee Constitution is correct, that all powers inherent in the people, we're not acting like it. And we're silly things like we've passed, like House Bill 1971, which strip rights away from the people. We're demonstrating, again, not only a bias against the firearms rights of Tennesseans, but all their creator endowed rights. And it goes back to what I mentioned in 1 Kings 21. There's a spirit of Jezebel of assuming authorities that those people in government do not have, because that's what she did when she wrote the letter for Ahab to go have Naboth killed, which is, and if you read that story, Richard, it gets even better. I just got this in church yesterday, so it's the reason I'm so fired up. Sometimes it's like my pastor is preaching just at me. I don't know if that ever happens to you, but if you read on, he didn't cover this in his message yesterday, but Jezebel hires what in the NASB, the New American Standard Bible, refers to as 2 worthless men to go testify against Naboth and his his legacy from his father, right? And or his heritage from his father. And I'm thinking, my goodness, we send lots of worthless men to do that now. I see that. And that's not okay. It's not okay constitutionally, and it's not okay under the laws of nature and nature's God, under which this republic was founded clearly. And we've allowed ourselves to assume that. So all that ramble to get to that, yes. And let me touch on one other thing there, because you talk about laws, and we had House Bill 1737 last year, which would have addressed the intent to go armed and the carry in parks problems that we have in law. But our 2514 also, a 2514 addressed many of those other issues. And we need comprehensive reform in our Tennessee firearms law. As Americans, we believe, and according per our Constitution, that we are innocent until proven guilty. We have a right to a trial by jury, and we have a right to keep and bear, or I mean, a right to a speedy trial. I'm sorry, my phone's wearing me out right now. And half of them are calling me. No, I'm doing this right. Anyways, we've allowed that to come to a point in Tennessee, and with the intent to go armed specifically. When you look at that, it's really an inversion of what we as Americans believe. We believe we are innocent until proven guilty. Yet with that intent to go armed phrasing that persists in our law, and we tried to remove that with those two different bills last year and before, we're saying to the Tennessean, because you're armed, you've committed a crime, and you have to provide a defense against your criminality. In other words, you have to prove yourself innocent. And what are we thinking? That that's okay? And what are these attorneys and what are these office holders who've all taken the same oath that I have, not to do anything injurious to the people? What are they thinking when they support that? What are all those people, when we tried to use Rule 53 this past year to bring House Bill 2514 from a committee where it had stagnated because the committee chair was more concerned about maintaining his committee chairmanship than he was doing what his oath required, just to be candid. And we couldn't get to move. And then you've got a senator who's rolled them to 2027, which should be a firing offense in my view. But anyways, we try to pull that forward. I got 17 Republicans and 4 Democrats who voted to move that bill just to be heard on the floor, just so the people got their wishes heard. And then you have a bunch of these strong 2A supporters that they couldn't even vote one way or the other, or they voted no because they'd been told to. I honestly, my friend, I don't know how some of those weak males lay their head on the pillow at night without cowering under the weight of their own poor decisions.
Number 11. Over the last 30 years, various taxpayer-funded individuals and departments, including the Department of Safety, the TBI, and local law enforcement, have advocated in the legislature to retain existing firearms restrictions and to even expand them. If elected governor, what will you do relative to the advocacy of the administrative branch as to the Second Amendment issues in the Tennessee legislature?
So for Second Amendment and all other things, the legislative liaisons going and working in many cases against bills that the governor doesn't like. And there's a difference in having a conversation and helping the legislator understand what the executive position is on things, but we should not be working for or against those. Understand it. When it hits the governor's desk, I'll make the decision whether it's going to be law or I'm going to veto it or just let it lay there. I want to move most of those legislative liaisons to work in the executive department, answering the phones and the email, because I'd like to see the people of Tennessee once again having a voice that they think the governor of the state works for them. And when they call, somebody either answers or calls them back. And when they email, someone replies. Obviously, one person, me, I'm not going to be able to do all that. But there's a cadre of those people that I think that we can do that very effectively. I think that that is going to be one of the greatest confidence builders that we will accomplish under a Fritts administration. That the people are going to feel like somebody in Nashville is actually listening to them and maybe even fighting for them sometimes. Um, but we will make it clear in our standing orders that if you are evidenced to have been working a bias on a bill coming through the General Assembly, especially if it's going to deprive a Tennessean of their rights, and in the context of this question, right to keep and bear arms, but other things as well, they'll find themselves soon on administrative leave because we don't have any room for that. That does not become the fourth branch of government, the administrative state, or a part of the administrative state that thinks that they can usurp authorities that they don't have. They do it all the time now, and we're going to stop it.
If elected governor, you will have the authority to appoint appellate and Supreme Court justices. What steps will you take to verify that any such candidates has a proven history of supporting the expansion and restoration of all constitutionally protected rights, including the Second Amendment?
So I think I'm not sure what the governor does now, but here's my vision for that: is to have a group of people, some of whom think like I do, and some who don't think like I do, that research and advise on all of those potential fillers of those seats. Because I think it's necessary to have a conversation in light of how those judges have opined or how they have prosecuted or defended against things in their previous history. I think the best leading indicator of what a man is going to do is his past performance on things. And I think that that's going to be something that requires much research on behalf of the team and briefings and conversations before we pull that forward, and then direct conversations with the persons to ask that man or woman what they feel about on these positions, get them to put it in writing. I think an affirmation, a letter of affirmation of rights and how we will defend the rights of the people as outlined in our Constitution in front of a holy God, I think is absolutely necessary.
And then finally, what would you like to tell potential voters to demonstrate to them that when it comes to the Second Amendment, including specific prior actions, that you are the only candidate that deserves their support?
Well, I would point to a couple things, Richard. I would point to the freedomindex.org. I think that's one of the most long-standing, widely used, and universally applicable assessments of voting records. I mean, you'll have lots of these politicians, they'll point to the rhinos are us or the or whatever, that I got 100 in that. But I think the Freedom Index, I'm a John Birch Society member, you know that. I hate communism. And I love the Constitution. And I think that if you look at that, I scored 100 last year. I'm assuming I was probably pretty close to 100 this year. I hadn't seen the scores yet. I've got a 94 lifetime. Both John and Marcia have scored in the 60s and 70s. Marcia has had years she scored in the 40s on those assessments. And while there may be a little bit of apples and oranges because Congressman Rose and Senator Blackburn are voting on federal legislative matters and I'm voting on state, it is the same group doing that assessment. And so I think that's the best comparison as to who is a constitutionalist and who is a small government person. Next, I would go to the legislation we offered first year. One of the things I ran on when I first ran for state rep was to provide some protection for our firearms manufacturers against what I would call predatory lawsuits. And we got that passed. And then, yourself, I guess, and I know it was Gun Owners of America, they had a big part in it. They sent us a list of things that we need to do with that law and we can make it best in the nation. We advocated for that last year in 2025. We got that passed. GOA, after we passed that, were quoted as saying we had the best in the nation protection for firearms and ammunition manufacturers or retailers in the state of Tennessee against those predatory type lawsuits. And people might ask, well, why is that important? Well, you don't have a Second Amendment if you can't buy ammo. You don't have a Second Amendment if you can't buy a firearm. And certainly that's the way the left tries to attack that. So I'm proud of that. We stood really firmly against this whole Hughes v. Lee appeal. We probably made some political enemies in the words that we used in the letter that we wrote. I don't care. I didn't go to Nashville to make friends. I have friends there. Love lots of the men, even the ones I disagree with on things. I love them. But it's time that we stop some of this weak and feckless behavior that we think we can decide what rights you get to enjoy and which ones you don't. And that's much of what we're trying to do, I think, in Nashville, even now, much less DC. And so I think we've taken on the whole, what I would call a robust constitutional carry with 2514. We've taken on the 1737 from this past year, where we stood up specifically against the intent to go armed language and the prohibition against carrying in parks. We've got consistent votes that are strong. I would look at the assessment that you all did. I don't think Senator Blackburn even sent anything in. There were zeros next to it. Congressman Rose was 20 of 27, I think. I was 27 of 27. Again, lots of people who may not be as tied into the Second Amendment stuff as perhaps we are, they may ask why Monty's so focused on that. I think it's the greatest litmus test of what a politician or a public servant, two different species, thinks of your status as a human being. Those that think that they can require you to ask Mother May I and get permission slips for suppressors and barrel length and limit your magazine capacity, and you can't carry here, you couldn't carry there, you've got to ask permission to carry, all those kinds of things that we do today. They don't look at us as fellow citizens. They look at us as subordinates that they can tax, tell what to do, and control. Only the purist in the Second Amendment actually looks at the people he or she are working for as an elected representative of the people. And whether that's state representative, state senator, county commissioner, or governor, we are a representative of the people. I heard Glenn Jacobs, who I love to death, but he was speaking for one of the other candidates recently, and he talked about how that candidate would govern. Well, I think in that one word, they've said they've let the whole enchilada out of their worldview. I don't need to be governed. I refuse to be governed. I expect to be served by those people who represent me within the boundaries of that contract that exists between me and the elected officials we call a constitution. And I really expect that those addendum to the Constitution, those Bill of Rights and that Declaration of Rights in our Tennessee Constitution be strictly held to, because somebody cared enough about it to write it down specifically to make sure we didn't mess with it. And we've lost that contractual view of what our Constitution is, because the words aren't the grantor of the rights. That's Almighty God. The words are the limitations on the government to prevent them from usurping authority and taking my rights. So I think there's a big difference between me and them. I would offer, I'm not a career DC politician that spent money, got us 39 trillion in debt. I've been willing to stand against budgets, even in the state of Tennessee, that have sent money to corporate welfare. And often, we talk about little things, and I know it's the Second Amendment, but this ties in. I promise I won't be too long with it. When you talk about the 4% grocery sales tax that I harp on removing, there's a couple things that happen with that. First and foremost, it leaves that 4 cents on every dollar that's spent on light bread, sweet milk, eggs, whatever, in the pocket of the citizen. Then they spend those dollars and they generate additional revenue locally, right? That's a good thing. But probably the better thing is it's going to pull, whether you remove a portion of that grocery sales tax, like we tried to step into it, the $150, $160 million, or the whole $880 million that we project that the state collects in that 4% tax. If you pull that money out of Nashville, you have removed some of the power that they are yielding over you, because every inch, every ounce of power that the government uses against a citizen in Tennessee is with their own citizens' tax dollars. And so anytime you can pull some of that back and leave it in the pockets of the people, it's a great liberty thing. And so we intend to keep pushing for that. I think that will help a lot of things like this.
Well, Monty, I appreciate you taking the time out of what I know is a very busy schedule. I don't know how you candidates can withstand the travel and the time, but we're very, very appreciative of you taking this time out so that our constituents and the Tennessee Firearms Association has its own group of constituents can hear directly from the horse's mouth what your thoughts are. These same questions will be asked of each of the candidates who agreed to come on, and then I will release them all the same day. And hopefully that will be Thursday morning just prior to early voting. So, again, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Richard. I appreciate it.